This is about transport and supply in World War One. Two technologies which were crucial in the shaping of World War One were railways and artillery railways. And artillery. Railways provided the enormous logistic capacity needed for the support of huge armies in the field for years on end, including the transportation of millions of artillery shells. Strong Belgian resistance to the German invasion included the demolition of their railway infrastructure and delayed both the enemy advance and the use of the railway network to support the supply of German forces. Even as soon as 1 month after the occupation, barely 15% of the railway network was operating, despite 26,000 workers being drafted in. The rapidly advancing German troops far overran their supply lines once they entered France, and they were soon up to 80 miles ahead of their nearest railhead, and the horse-drawn transport could not adequately bridge the gap. The increasingly exhausted German troops were out of both food and ammunition while facing fierce resistance, as the French used their well-developed railway network around Paris to assemble a new army to protect their capital city. Meanwhile, British troops were rushed across the Channel to be deployed with the Belgian and French forces. The German advance ground to a halt. This theme of the memento of an initially successful advance faltering as the supply lines were outrun, while defending forces were rapidly concentrated to fill the breach, was to be replayed many times during the next 4 years. The Central Powers agreed on one expectation from the outset, that the war would be a rapidly offensive war which would be over very quickly. They were wrong. By Christmas 1914, defence lines of the trenches stretched from the Channel coast to the Swiss border. Maintaining these huge forces in the field, up to 2 million men were serving on the Western Front, required vast amounts of supplies. Every bullet, blanket, bandage, artillery battery, and tin of bully beef had to be manufactured and transported where and when it was required. By 1918, each division of about 12,000 men needed about 1,000 tons of supplies every day, equivalent to 2 supply trains, each of 50 wagons. When a major offensive was being planned, even larger quantities of material had to be concentrated in the preparation for an operation which might last for months. Railways were the only way of moving this volume of material over land, and a supply system was developed, especially after a major reorganisation in 1916, for the British situation was complicated by the English Channel. War material had to be railed to the Channel port, and until special ferries were built to carry the wagons loaded onto the until special ferries were built to carry wagons loaded onto the ferries. You see, that's a bit of a mix-up.
Yes, sorry.
War material had to be carried to the Channel port, loaded onto a ferry boat, and sailed across the Channel, where they were reloaded onto the French train or barge to be carried forward to the main supply dumps being on the British lines. Getting this close to the front was comparatively easy part of the process. The problem really began about 7 miles from the front. Anywhere beyond this point was potentially within the range of the devastating effects of the enemy's long-distance artillery shelling. Consequently, the main supply dumps and railway yards had to be established before this danger zone had been reached. I do apologise for the mix-up there. Let's finish that one.
Right. Okay, that's the end of part one. Right, okay, Charlie will read the second part in a few minutes. I know, you see, it can be very difficult for somebody just to give somebody a sheet of paper to read when they've not gone through it, because I bring all the papers, you see, so is anybody to blame? It's me.
Don't be daft.
So, okay then. Right, now, to a little bit of respite from World War One, Linda's going to read the story of a history of what was a theatre in Lodge Lane, and it's now a bingo hall. And if anybody's ever heard of the Pavilion in Lodge Lane, now I have memories of this theatre because my mum and dad, Wednesday night was their night off. And they always went either to the pictures or the theatre, and the theatre was always the Pavilion, and it was always a variety show. And I remember going there to pantomimes when I was a child.
I remember going to
and I think you have been there when it's been a bingo hall.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So Linda's going to read a bit of the history of the Pivy, as it is known in local parlance.